Good morning, everyone. This is Valerie Gupte from People Matters, and we are back with another exciting webcast in partnership with Adrenaline on the topic 9 ways to make your employee engagement survey a big success. This is what you, as the HR specialist anchoring an EES, can do differently to ensure that you get great participation, clear findings, sharp insights, and focused action plans so that you can see a real, tangible jump in the engagement levels. This webcast will focus on how to prepare so that you get actionable findings and how to facilitate a high participation rate among your employees. Also, how can you, as the HR professional and the business leader, stay focused on high impact items and how to sustain the implementation of these action plans? Because as we all know in the HR fraternity, that employee engagement surveys can really give you invaluable insights into your own organization's well-being. So to take us through their expert views, we have today with us Mr. Shyam Raman. He's the Executive Vice President, Group HR of Murugappa Group. Hi, Mr. Shyam. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Morning. Morning to everyone.
It also gives me great pleasure to also welcome Vidya Sam. She's the Senior HR Manager at Adrenaline. She is an HR professional with more than 13 years of work experience across multiple industries and has held various positions in talent acquisition, talent management, and also various business partner roles. Good morning, Vidya. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you for having me.
So before we begin this webcast and I turn it over to Vidya, I would like to remind everybody that we have saved some time for you at the end of the session to ask a few questions. Also, we request you, when you are sharing your questions, maybe add in a little bit about your experience with your employee engagement surveys so that we can have a more insightful discussion. So for those who are listening to us live, make sure that you post your questions at any time during the session in the comment section on your right side of the screen. We'll try to respond to as many questions as possible, within the given time. So we have an exciting topic for us today in this webcast. So without any further delay, let me invite Vidya Sam from Adrenaline to take over. Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Valerie. A very good morning to all. Thank you, Mr. Khan. We're so glad that you could join us. Especially this topic is very know that employee engagement is a key driver to any organization's success. Hence, it's also important that it's not looked at merely a tick box exercise, and it's also easily said than done. And I also believe that the crux of it starts right from understanding the purpose of why we want to run an engagement survey. The purpose, we also need to look at the design aspect of it, how simple we want to keep it, increasing the the participation rates, and thereafter methodically identifying key themes from these results. And I truly believe that this is a great platform to hear from Mr. Shyam on his views about building a successful employee engagement survey. So without any further delay, over to you, Mr. Shyam. We're looking forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you very much for your introduction as well as for setting the context. So let's go on right to the topic right away. And what I'd like to invite people to do is, I'm sure many of you are already used to conducting employee engagement surveys and so on. So first of all, thank you very much for your interest in the topic, for joining us here today. And I'd be equally interested in hearing from you about your experiences during the question and answer session as well. So let's jump right into it. That is the topic: 9 ways to make your employee engagement survey, well, rock. Um, One thing I'd like to address at the very beginning is this whole issue of employee engagement versus employee experience. We see a lot of traction in the media today, especially in business management media, HR media, and so on, that we need to move from employee engagement to employee experience. Our belief really is that, and I'm sure many of you will share this, that engagement is the result of the employees' experiences in the organization, right? And we as HR people and business leaders, we have the opportunity to curate a set of experiences for employees. What has happened is that, thankfully, technology today allows us to customize and personalize these experiences than we've been able to do in the past. So customization and personalization would have been very cumbersome in a non-technical or a non-technology enabled environment. And today, what many of these technologies do, whether it is AI or whether it is analytics and so on, help us to personalize it based on data available that we have with us about the employees, and personalize their experience for them, as well as enable them to customize their own choices based on the technology available with us. So in our view, we are not talking of experience versus engagement. We think experience leads to engagement, and the more we can drill down in the engagement surveys about the experiences that employees are having, then the more we have the knowledge and the data to be able to curate those experiences accordingly. So that's something that I want to get out of the way upfront as to engagement or experience. What do we all want from an employee engagement survey? I think it's common, it's high participation rates, it's clear, actionable results, it's fresh insights into employee behavior, not just behavior, their expectations and their aspirations. We also want buy-in from leadership for implementing the actions, and then we want sustained implementation. So the whole employee engagement cycle from participation to sustained action, there are a clear set of expectations that any company, any HR leader or business leader anchoring the entire exercise in their organization will definitely want all of this. Obviously, of course, we want improved engagement at the end of all of it, right? So happy and productive employees is what we want, and the engagement survey is merely a tool, an instrument that we can use to provide data so that we can take actions not based on somebody's gut feel or whims and fancies or what we did in the previous company that I worked for kind of thing, but can actually work on data that is that our own employees are willing to share with us. So that's what we want from an employee engagement survey. And it's important to keep these objectives in mind as we cycle through the entire process of the survey. So if we talk of communication, we want to see, will the communication give us high participation rates? Will the communication give us buy-in from leadership, and so on and so forth, so that we keep these objectives in mind and use them as a kind of touchstone or a filter to see, to take decisions on what we want to do in each part of the cycle. So today we will cover the employee engagement survey in all three aspects. Pre-survey, what do we do? What's the preparatory work that we do to ensure that we have good actionable results? During the survey, what are the kind of administrative issues that could come up? And finally, post the survey, how do we select the right things to work on, and how do we ensure sustainability of the actions that we have that we are taking? Yeah. A word here about the roles of HR and the people leading the engagement survey. If I may take an analogy, we can look at a doctor prescribing a set of tests for us, and then diagnosing the kind of issues that a patient may have, then prescribing the solutions, and then reviewing the progress. So there is one role that there is an important role that the doctor plays, and we as anchors of the engagement survey have a role as a doctor in terms of diagnosing, in terms of prescribing the tests, in terms of interpreting the test results, prescribing solutions, and so on. But there's an equally important role and in an engagement survey, typically the same person plays both the roles. There's also the role of a lab technician, and who ensures the tests are conducted reliably, that the results are useful, results are relevant, and a good report from a lab technician helps the doctor make the correct diagnosis. Some of you maybe even have experiences in real life in a medical situation where the lab technician was able to spot something that even the doctor may not even have asked for a test for. So a well-run survey with useful and relevant and specific actionable reports then make it easier for everybody in the company to do the right things about the engagement survey's results. And therefore, both these roles are equally important in the context of an engagement survey. Some of us may prefer the doctor role. It seems like the more macro thing to do. But it's equally important to make sure that the lab results are useful, because there's no point in saying, look, I underwent a CT scan or an MRI, but the test results are invalid. There's no point in doing that. And therefore, we will cover today both aspects of how you can be a good doctor, as well as how we can all be good lab technicians as well with respect to the survey. So these are 9 things that we'll talk about. 1 is about asking the right questions. 2, we'll ask them, how do we ask them well? 3, how do we make our employee data work hard? How do we make our pre-survey communication work hard as well? The need to digest the results before we disseminate them within the organization. How do we report the results in terms of process for courses? Action planning, how do we pick some of the optimal items to work on? What do we do with managers, because they are key? How do we interpret data on managers? How do we support their becoming better managers, more engaging managers for their teams? And finally, how do we make it sustainable through structured reviews? So let's start with asking the right questions. Broadly, you will have 3 sets of issues to deal with this. From our experience, that's what we have learned. 1, there is something that the vendor will assess. The vendor has, I'm assuming that you go with the vendor for your engagement surveys. The vendor has a certain model. They have a certain framework, and they apply it across multiple companies, multiple industries, multiple countries, and so on. And that's a valuable service because that gives you benchmarks that make sure that the model is tested, it is validated, that the questions are appropriate, and so on. Sorry. So that is the strength that the vendor brings to the table. Now, we believe that we pick a model and stick with it because improvement activities, picking a model and sticking to it has several advantages. 1, you get a common vocabulary across the organization in terms of engagement itself. So managers and employees across multiple locations, divisions, functions, all have a common vocabulary. And that helps a lot in the action planning and the implementation, because when you say recognition, everybody has the same interpretation of the word, rather than looking at it as a new label that they would like to add their own interpretation of. Which model should we use? Now, when in economics, there is a question: is economics a science or an art? And then somebody answered it saying, creating econometric models using appropriate parameters, etc., is a science. Picking the right model for your country, for your economy, is an art, because you need to know what exactly drives your economy better than you probably know it best than the person who created the model, and therefore there is an art involved in it. It's the same with employee engagement surveys. There are several vendors. Each of them will tell you that their model is the best. It's probably better in one aspect or another, and they are probably right. But which of those models works best for your company is something that you and your leadership team will have to decide. And that means investing time and effort in understanding what the model does, how it has been tested, what are the kind of universal appeal that it has in terms of applicability, and so on. And then picking one that sounds more appropriate for your company. So I said pick and stick. There is the other alternative which you'll be left with otherwise, which is pick and pick, which means you pick a model and then after you've done the survey, you will pick holes in this model and saying, no, this is not what we had in mind, this is how it should not be, and so on. So that it's better to avoid that by spending a lot of time upfront in understanding the models and what the survey will deliver in terms of results, what are the kind of analytics it's possible, and how the model applies to your organization. So that's the first set of things. Those are a set of standard questions that the vendor will assess. However, you may have your own hypothesis, and therefore there may be things that you want to assess. This could be based on several company-specific things. You may have had a recent restructuring, for example, and you may want to know how that went. Or you may have introduced some new policies, comp and ben, something like that, and you want to know how it's going on with the how the employee population is receiving those. So those are questions that are specific to your company, need not be necessarily part of the universal set of questions that the vendor wants to assess or the vendor is used to assessing. So those are a set of questions that you will want to add. Obviously, in these things, you don't want to also get very specific. There'll be some function which says, or some department which says, we did this, can we add one question for my department? Or can we add one question for my location? But you want to balance it out and see something that is pan organization rather than very specific to smaller parts and segments of the organization. So that's the second set of questions, which is what do you want to assess in addition to what the vendor normally wants to assess. The third is if you're already running engagement surveys, then you may want to make your subsequent dipsticks and subsequent surveys more impactful. So for example, if you find a series that you're not getting enough differentiation in certain sets of questions, you may want to drop those questions or modify those questions by picking a different set of questions from the menu that the vendor has. Similarly, you may have taken certain actions, and you may now want to drill deeper to get into the effect that action is having on the employee population, and therefore you want to drop some questions on some other topics and add 3 or 4 or 5 questions on a specific action that you've taken to see whether it is reaching the employees as you had intended. So therefore, there are 3 parts. There is what the vendor will assess, the standard framework. There is what you want to assess, which is specific to your company based on certain immediate situations. And there are things that you've already assessed, which you want to expand upon or drop, depending on how things have been. Of course, it's also good to keep in mind what the vendor's analytics capabilities are, because that will give you a range of additional questions and insights that you can generate by asking those questions. So assuming you have a set of right questions, we also want to ask them well. What do I mean? We believe that it's always good to have open-ended questions which require verbatim answers. Now, I have heard people say we are going to talk to 10,000 employees or 100,000 employees. Do you think we can analyze all of that verbatim answers? The answer is today is yes. Technology can give you good analysis of textual data that you may have in addition to the numerical data that you have. And reading the open-ended answers often answers a number of doubts that you will have, and you will see a little later when you want to dig deeper into what the results are. It's good to use them as a starting point to figure out what employees are thinking and what they have in mind and what they want you to know. So make sure that there is always a set of verbatim answers and questions that they can answer verbatim. Second is you will need translations in most. If you're a nationwide company with multiple layers of employees and so on, you will need translations in multiple languages. So within the Murugappa group, we translate it into some 8 languages across the country. And vendors are not typically equipped to do their own translations. So you may have to invest time and energy into translating them well. A good way is to translate them into the language and then give it back to somebody else to translate it back into English to see if you get more or less the same results. And if you do, you have a good translation. it's important to invest in this, because otherwise we do not want the results to be invalid because of poor translations. There may be some questions that you may want to test for comprehension, and even though they may have been tested by the vendor elsewhere, in your context, there may be some questions that you want to test for comprehension before the survey is up, and you may want a small group of employees to do that as well. One thing we found is that the number of questions is not a dampener. We have run questions, 60, 70 questions, and nobody's really come back and complained that there are too many questions. And normally that's because we are always focused on asking questions about the employees. As long as it's about me, I'm happy to answer questions. We are not asking generic questions. We're not saying what should be done here and so on and so forth. We need not fight shy of asking a number of questions if we want to drill deeper into what the employee is experiencing in the organization and how that can impact engagement. So we have a set of questions, and we sort of asking them well as well. The other thing, pre-survey issue, is making your employee data work harder. This is one of the most difficult aspects of the entire pre-survey work, because in many cases, employee data rests in multiple systems within the company. Performance data may be somewhere, comp data may be somewhere, the basic employee data may be in an HRIS system somewhere, and so on. So it is vital to invest time in cleaning up the data. It is vital to invest time in ensuring that the data is fully coordinated and synced across all the data that you have. You may have to sanitize the data. You may have had simple issues like, how you fed in certain names of certain functions, how you fed in names or codes for certain grades and things like that are specific to your company, which the vendor will not be in a position to spot. Even if they figured out a way to clean it up, they will not be able to spot the details of these issues. So as a good technician, it's important for you anchoring the show to clean this data as much as possible, integrate it and sync it across multiple databases and so on, and present a common data. It's also important to look at what are the hypotheses that you have, and do your data have the ability to validate those hypotheses in the results of the survey. If you do not have the data to validate the hypothesis, it is okay to ask the data, even if it is simple data about somebody. It's okay to ask the data from the employee during the survey itself as part of one of the questions. Similarly, what are the report cuts you want? The normal things of functions, grades, gender, and so on. But in addition to that, if you want additional cuts which combine certain elements of the data, then you will have to make sure that that data is available to the vendor. So if you may also have some nice to have reports which somebody in the organization is looking for, but is data all there for all of this is important to make out. So this is probably going to be the most time consuming part of the pre-survey work, in terms of making sure that the data is absolutely good, so that there are no ways in which the data can let you down in terms of results. The typical watchouts, I'm sure anybody who's run a survey will know, is dynamic organization structures. Sometimes by the time you give the data and you complete the survey, your structure may have changed. And is your data capable of still making the results valid? Similarly, multiplicity of units and SBUs, where divisions, functions, where we may have fancy acronyms for each of them. How are they harmonized in the data? Data from multiple databases we've already talked of, and sometimes long gaps between collection data and survey administration, which can make everything managers change, specific issues change, grades change. So if you collect the data before your annual appraisal cycle and conduct the survey after the annual appraisal cycle, then everybody who was in grade X has now become grade X plus 1, and your whole data goes for a toss. So it's important to ensure that, I know this sounds pretty obvious, but sometimes there are pressures on the team that is conducting the survey to say, no, we must hold it at that time, and after this there is month end, year end, customer visits, etc., and so on. So this pressure normally leads us to compromise on cleaning up the data and ensuring that the data remain valid after the survey as well. So I cannot emphasize enough the need to make the data work hard. Equally, the pre-survey communication as well is something that we think plays a very, very important role in ensuring the success of the survey as well as post-survey. It's good to put down some overall goals for the pre-survey communication. Put them down and say, how can we increase participation? How can it facilitate post-survey actions as well? How do we set expectations with the pre-survey communication? Very, very often we find that the pre-survey communications is handled by maybe an agency or corporate communications or someone who is more, shall we say, interested in the form than in the content. And therefore, you'll find very nice graphics or very stunning posters and so on, which may not necessarily coincide with the or align or may not be necessarily aligned with the objectives of what we want to achieve with this survey, with the communication. And a lot can be achieved with the communication. So for one filter we use, which anybody in communications does, would be, what do you want employees to know, feel, do with this communication, whether it's a mail, whether it is a poster or whatever. What do you want them to know about the survey? What do you want them to feel about the survey? And what do you want them to do about the survey? Similarly, what do you want the CEO and the leaders to know, feel, do with the same communication? So for just to give an example, if there is a mail from or a communication from the leader which says, I will be tracking the results personally and I will keep you posted of progress, then that puts the ownership and the onus of doing that on the leader who's sending out that communication. So it's a simple sentence, and if you mean it, then it has already brought you some amount of structure into your post-survey administration of what the engagement actions are. So it's important to think through the pre-survey communication so that it helps you in the post-survey activity, not just increases or not just creates awareness, which is the very base level objective that you'll have, but also sets the expectations among employees as well as among the leaders as to what the survey is all about and what you want to do. Like I talked about the questions themselves, translations are important, especially if you have a regional audience that requires. I may add here that in the Murugappa group, we also tend to include the non-management staff across the country, and therefore these translations are much more important in our context. If you have a more homogeneous English-speaking audience, employees, then translations may not be as important in this case as well. Okay, so we've got questions. We're asking them well. We have figured out the data bits, and we have now conducted the pre-survey communication as well. Let's assume we've done the survey and we have the results. It's important, needless to say really, but there are times, especially pressures of time and so on, where sometimes the team anchoring the survey also sees the results along with the leadership team for the first time. The vendor is presenting it and the team also doesn't know what the results are. And nothing can be a bigger sin in this whole thing. It is important for the company's anchor of the survey to clean up and contextualize the data and the results and the reports to the company. Like we started out by saying, the vendor has a certain worldview and has a certain set of understanding about what their survey is all about. And therefore, they will present their results in the way that they deem fit for a general population of companies. But there may be specific sensitivities, there may be specific things that you want to focus on, there may be specific issues that you want to highlight and emphasize or escalate, all of which will be missed if the vendor puts it up as slide number 65 in the presentation, right? So you may want to not you may want to, you will want to contextualize the presentation to your company's leadership team, and then make sure that the key issues are clearly dealt with. Also, I don't need to mention this again, but cleaning up the presentation is important. The results is important. Sometimes the vendors will not know the internal issues of, like we said, acronyms and abbreviations and so on. So it's important to clean up. There may be small typos and so forth. So it's important to clean it up, because otherwise the credibility of the entire exercise may go for a toss. If there is a glaring error in slide number 3, then the whole audience is sort of spending time rectifying that rather than moving on and saying, here's the big picture that we need to see. So it's important to clean up and contextualize. The second part, the thing that I would like to emphasize here is, as people running the survey, we should be delighted with surprises. If there is a result that doesn't agree with what your assumption was, wonderful, because this is the greatest opportunity you will get to get fresh insights on what the employee's aspirations and behaviors are. Very often we will get defensive. How can that happen? I know this place. I've been working here day in and day out. How is it that the results are different from what I expected? So I can give you examples. We've had a unit which, in a particular year that we did the survey, had hit all-time high numbers. They had won an award for quality from a global award, and in general it was thought that morale was high. And we found out that from the engagement survey that their scores were among the lowest in the company, in that particular company. So we had to find out what their expectations were, why did they feel this way, and so on. But it's easy to get defensive about it and say, how dare they say this, they've had such, it cannot be right, there's something wrong with this, and so on. But it's best to listen. 100 or 200 or 300 or 5,000 people won't be wrong when they are giving you these answers. So be delighted with surprises, but it's important, therefore, that you know the surprise ahead of the time that you disseminate it to the leadership. If you are going to be surprised along with leadership, and if they turn around to you and ask, what is this, and you have a problem, then that's going to be an issue. So the best insights come from surprises, so welcome them, but get to know them beforehand. The third point, and we also learned this over a period of time, is to go for the big picture and don't sweat the small stuff. There is a great temptation to nitpick on something. No, there's 1% is wrong, this 0.5% should have been the other way around, or if we had said the instead of then we could have got it well. And these are all in the big picture, is that the employee survey is a diagnostic tool. It's an instrument. What we do with it is in our hands. So there is no real benefit to be got by nitpicking with small parts of the questions and answers and some reports. Best is to go for the big picture, that the employees have spoken and they have told you something, and it's our job to accept that as the reality and move on with what we need to do. It is possible that there are some questions which they have misunderstood. It is possible, but there are ways to go and find out what they understood and what we want to do. So there is no real benefit to be got out of nitpicking with the results and asking for different cuts and so on and so forth, especially driven by some of the small stuff that may be there. So don't sweat the small stuff. Go for the big picture that the employees are telling you loud and clear. So digesting the results before disseminating it to the rest of the company is an important part of the role of the lead, the employee engagement lead in the organization. So how do we report it? Yeah. So here is again, it's intuitive. It doesn't need mentioning, but time pressures, which are normally there, will lead to all of these issues. The leadership team is traveling to Europe, so let's have it before that, and so on. So these kinds of pressures come in, but it's important for us to make sure that the principles by which we want to play this game are held rather than the mechanics. So leaders must get a clear understanding of what this whole model is about, what is the methodology, what are the trends, what are the key insights, and what are the key focus areas that we want to focus on, or we would like them to consider focusing on. So it's important that leaders get a cut of the report that is meant for leadership action. The temptation is to give leaders millions of slides on this, and I'll show you every grade, every function, every location, floor by floor, and so on and so forth. So, and some leaders may also like to get into the detail, get their hands dirty, and so on. But as an initial presentation to the leadership team as a whole, it's important to keep the picture clear, concise, and focused. So for them, it's also important that they understand how the scoring is done, so that they don't go blindly by some number somewhere, because numbers can mislead, as we will see later. It's important for them to see trends and so on. And it's important for them to see benchmarks. There are some, as we all know, anybody who's run engagement scores, in the Indian context, there are certain items which are always low. The recognition may be low across the country, across let us say industry sectors, across companies, and so on. So we need to sensitize the leadership teams to these nuances as part of the presentation, so that the way they own up to these numbers as well as lead the implementation will be appropriate. HR must get the most detailed set of data that can possibly be done. Obviously, HR will also have access to the data itself, to the raw data, so that they can do their own analysis that they may need. They may do more cuts than the vendor gives you, and so on. Similarly, what we need to show employees as well is needs to be tailored to how we are going to action the items after the survey. Again, giving employees a wide swathe of data may confuse. At the same time, giving them very little may look like you're hiding something. So there needs to be a balance between what we can share with employees. It's good to share all the headlines with them in terms of if you've checked out different drivers of engagement, if you've checked out different experiences, it's good to share and be completely transparent with that. But giving them cuts and function-wise and so on and so forth becomes a bit too much at a company level. Those may be reserved for individual discussions and meetings that you have with the leadership team, where the leaders can take up their respective organizations, units, business units, locations, and so on and so forth, where they can drill down deeper. So sometimes the vendor is unwilling or may not have the time or the resources to make so many cuts of the same results. So they may just give one large cut and say, like, you deal with this. Then, yeah, we have to deal with it. But dumping the same thing across all segments of the audience will lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of unnecessary work that HR or the engagement lead will then have to get involved in. So it's best to prepare the appropriate results for the appropriate audiences. So it's important that reporting is designed, you pick the horses for the courses. Then we move to what is now post-survey. We are now looking at action planning. How do you pick the optimal items to work on? Two things very quickly. One is items with absolute low scores are not automatic choices. Similarly, items with absolute high scores are not automatically to be ignored, right? So both these are, because these are very tempting, and sometimes the presentations will also make them in such a way, you'll put the low scores in red and say, okay, look at all the red items and so on and so forth. So it becomes easy to pick them up from the slides or the results or the reports that are generated and circulated and shared. That will mislead. So what do we pick? It is important to understand through appropriate statistical analysis what are the items that influence the overall engagement score most. That the vendor is normally in a position to give you by running multiple regressions and so on and so forth, to be able to tell you what mix of factors, what is the impact that each of them has, both as a combination of absolute impact as well as relative impact with respect to other factors which may be in the results. So it's important to understand the influence and pick up those which are high, which have a high impact on the engagement, rather than drivers that have simply have low scores. As I said, there are some which are societal low scores, some which will be low across industries, and just picking them up because they are low may not help. Second is items which are or should be part of your employee value proposition are things that you want to focus on more. You're saying here, this is what we are known for, this is why people are with us, and if we are scoring low or high on this, then we need to understand why and where we are on that. Third, maybe a set of items which employees use as a reference points in your particular industry. You may say, look, I am in financial services, and this is what people are looking for. So how are we doing with respect to those within our industry? And in a practical way, pick up items for implementation on which there is a consensus within the leadership team, within the organization, so that you can get a quick move on in terms of taking the right actions afterwards. A few more pointers in this regard. It's nice to have a set of items that we want to work on which have distributed responsibility for action and implementation. It should not become an HR exercise, and that is almost certainly doomed for failure. So it should be items that HR can anchor, line managers can own, or leadership can champion. So they should be items that are the ones that you pick. Maybe I should mention this. It is important to pick a handful and not too many. We would say 3 or 4 would be the best that you can work on. Picking up 20 different experience issues, all of which you want to address in the next 6 months, is a recipe for disaster. It will ensure that nothing gets done. So it's important to prioritize what we want to do. And when prioritizing, it's useful to keep these in mind, that the responsibility for doing something about it is distributed across the organization and not resting on the shoulders of just one function or one leader or so on. Also important to prioritize items for visible quick wins. Employees should get a sense that something has happened. The easiest part of doing that is, for example, if there are issues on physical infrastructure, policy changes, leader communication and contact. So communication from the organization, listening to the employees, having more. So these are things which are visible, which anybody can feel immediately. These are things that, and so any changes or any unhappiness, dissatisfaction that has been expressed in the survey on such items and similar items like this, which can be acted upon quickly and also make a visible difference to what's going on, you should pick up earlier and prioritize them as well. That will make implementing the more difficult longer-term changes, and cultural issues that you may have easier, because there is a credibility to the whole exercise. There is a belief that yes, we are being listened to and things are happening, things are changing, and so on. That makes the more difficult changes easier to adopt and implement when you have these visible quick wins immediately. So we would strongly recommend that you take these visible quick wins and take them up for implementation as well as for communication subsequently. Yeah. A couple of more things about picking up the optimal items. Please dig deeper into the why of the scores. Scores may be good, scores may be bad. Either way, we would imagine that you will want to not assume that you know why it is low. It's better to have a score. Better to have a score understood better. The easiest way to do it is to have focus group discussions in that units. But the big danger is that a lot of focus group discussions turn into bogus group discussions because of either cherry picking of who should participate. The HR person, their friends in the company all sit around it, or you have a poor facilitator of the discussion, or you put the leader bang in the middle of the discussion and nobody wants to open their mouth and so on. So a good focus group discussion will give you much greater insight before you take action on any of those items, because it's important to understand the why of the scores and make sure it's not what you think is the reason. We'll spend a few minutes on managers. Some of this is obvious. This is also conventional wisdom. People leave, people join organizations but leave managers and so on and so forth. It's important to give managers their scorecard and be very clear about and transparent about their low scores and help them do something about it, give them the training, and so on. At the same time, we should also make sure that we look at the manager scorecard not in isolation, but in combination with the overall engagement score. So that gives us broadly 4 quadrants, where, as you can see, there is people who are happy with the company and happy with the manager in quadrant 1, which is a good thing. If you go to the quadrant 4, you can see people are unhappy with the company and unhappy with the manager, which is not a good thing, but at least gives us a clear priority to work on. The clear ones are the ones in quadrants 2 and 3. In quadrant 2, you have people who are happy with the company but unhappy with the manager. Typically, in companies that have been around for long, where there are a lot of loyal employees sitting there for 10 years, 12 years, 20 years, and the manager is new, this is very likely to happen. The manager may not have yet settled in or into the role, or he's not yet figured out the culture of the place and so on and so forth. But the people are happy with the company. They are not going anywhere. They're waiting to see this too shall pass. We'll wait for the manager to leave or be thrown out or whatever, or be changed to some other department. So if this is not handled, then people from quadrant 2 can sometimes move to quadrant 4, which we don't want. So it's important to know whether people are happy with the company and not with the manager and so on. Similarly, in quadrant 3, you have another set of people who are unhappy with the company but happy with the manager. So here we have a team that is well knit, which is the manager is doing a good job of taking the team along, but together as a team they feel badly done. So for instance, we had a company division where the quality function was unhappy in a business, but they were happy with their manager, and they felt that as a team they were not being recognized. So when production hits a new high, the president sends out a message saying congratulations to the production department, but the quality is not mentioned and so on. So here there are people who are there's a cohesive team, there is a team that's working well together, but together they have some issues with the company. So it's important to identify these differences between unhappiness with the company and unhappiness with the manager, so that we can take the appropriate action. So obviously the actions in each of these quadrants will differ, and it helps to look at the manager score in conjunction with the overall employee engagement score of the team, so that we get a good sense of what's happening there. The other thing about taking up with managers is that is this debate. I don't know if there is a debate everywhere, but we have a debate here as to whether it's you can deal with engagement in the course of the regular performance management systems, in the KRAs and so on, or do you keep it outside of them? Many of you may think there's a no-brainer. Obviously, you have to put it in the KRA and it gets done. So in many company cultures, only what gets put in the KRAs get done. KRAs, KPIs, key objectives, whatever you call them, get done, and others may be. So if that's the kind of way in which the company runs, and that success is built on that, then please, by all means, please go ahead and place it in the KRAs of the individuals. But placing it there in the KRAs also has its own disadvantages. So one is that KRAs tend to be for the year, and there's a tendency of, okay, you had this last year, so I finished employee engagement. Now I'm no longer having to do employee engagement. I've already completed it. Now give me some other target, which is obviously not the right way to go about it. Another danger is, I don't know if there are companies which would place, businesses which would place employee engagement on a high priority in a KRA. So if there is a business deliverable and there's an employee engagement deliverable, it's likely that the employee engagement deliverable gets a lower weightage. So say a 10% weightage may not make a difference to the manager, who may say outperform in his business deliverables and say, look, I've done that. So Also, the need for measurability in KPIs sometimes make this whole engagement thing very activity oriented. Have 10 meetings, meet 4 people, give feedback, and so on, which it's easy to tick box and move on without actually making a difference to the engagement. So these are dangers of simply placing it in the KRA and expecting it to work. So therefore, we prefer that uh, in addition to KRA or instead of KRA, if it is there in the individual development plan of the manager, then the journey, the nature of a journey can be experienced by the manager rather than something that, engagement will be improved by 31st March and afterwards it's sort of, you lock it and throw away the key kind of thing, which is not a practical way in which human behavior changes. Uh, Similarly, by putting it in the IDP system, we can in the development planning, we can give it top billing and say, look, you're terrific at everything, just work on your employee engagement capabilities, right? Which is something that you can't do in a KRA and say, look, it's okay, don't do your business numbers, just do employee, which is something you can do in a development. Thirdly, we can also make it very clear by putting it in a development plan. Look, this is a derailer risk for you. If this doesn't improve, you're not going anywhere in the company, which is again not possible in a KRA kind of situation. So we would recommend including engagement improvement for managers in the IDPs in their individual development plans. The danger is that if the individual development planning system is not robust and rigorous, then it will get completely ignored, which is a risk. And coming to the final point, very quickly, I don't have to say this, but it's important. Reviews and reviews. You're not going to get sustainability of the engagement results if the review mechanisms, the governance mechanisms around the whole thing is not strong. So it is important to have a review calendar, and it's important to have the roles of HR, the roles of supervisors, and the roles of senior leaders very clear in this calendar. Who will give the updates? Who will, how will the manager help to keep it continuously top of mind? How will the senior leaders continuously demonstrate ownership of engagement as an issue? Is it the first slide in what they report to the board, for example? So how do you keep this? It's important to keep this top of mind in terms of creating an appropriate governance mechanism that reviews progress along this. So very quickly to summarize, ask the right questions, pick the right model, stick with it, ask those questions well, make your employee data work harder, make your pre-survey communication, make it keeping in mind implementation, digest the results before dissemination, report results appropriate to the audiences, pick the optimal items to work on, managers are key, and review, and review. So those are the 9 steps that I wanted to share with you today. I would thank you very much for your patience, and I would welcome your questions, and as well as if you have your own experiences, I'd love to learn from them as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shyam, for sharing those wonderful insights. I think basically the last slide, you just summarized everything so well. And I'm sure we have a lot more questions that we have from the audience. So Vidya and Shyam, if you don't mind, I can just take up Prachi's question
Sure.
to start off with. So the thing is, Prachi is asking on what parameters can HR leaders identify survey partners for the organization. So, would you be able to help out in answering that? Like, what are some of the parameters,
Yeah.
just quickly, that we need to look for?
So first thing is the model that they have. So you should be comfortable that the model that they have works for you, for your organization. Because there are different models. There are people who will say only these 5 things matter, only these 10 things matter. There are people who will allow you to a wider range of issues and so on. So that is the first thing. Second is their own abilities, how well tested it is, how much of it has been done. Like you would choose any other vendor, the general vendor management principles that come in, Of course, finally, there is always the cost and so on. But model, analytics ability, and flexibility with the reporting and data sharing and so on is what I would go by to begin with. Yeah.
Perfect. In the interest of time, let me just jump to Shailaja's question. She's particularly asking about the IT sector. I think during the presentation you had mentioned that sometimes so the way you frame the questions in the employee survey is more important than the number of the questions. So if the questions are framed correctly, then the number of the questions in the survey does not really matter. However, Shailaja is asking, especially in the IT organization, she believes that the number of questions do matter. How should an HR professional resolve this particular challenge? Kind of striking the right
First,
balance in the number of questions and how you frame them.
I have no personal experience in the IT sector, so I won't be able to comment on that. I don't know if Vidya can come in and talk about them. But I would say if a company is seen consistently acting on employee engagement survey results, employees will not have a problem answering any number of questions because they feel that something is going to happen. If there is an element of skepticism or cynicism that is allowed to creep into the employee audience, then they are saying, yeah, we've seen this before, so why are you bothering us with so many questions year after year, right? So that is the key to it. Employee must get a sense of what I'm going to tell the organization will be listened to and acted upon. If that is there, the number of questions don't matter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I guess you're saying that the pre-survey part and the whole journey kind of shapes up how the employee approaches the questionnaire and kind of walks through the whole engagement survey, which actually ties in really well with James's question. James is asking that there is always reluctance to participate in surveys. There's always that, oh, there's another form that I have to fill out, that kind of an attitude from the employees. So how can HR leaders handle this and kind of create that level of engagement with the employee engagement survey, So
yeah. First is it's not just HR leaders. So it should come from the business leaders. If the business leaders' body language and communication says, guys, HR has come up with one more questionnaire, now go fill it, then it's not going to happen. So there is a lot of belief that we need to build into the business leader first before asking the employee, because the employee is looking up more to the business leader than to HR in signaling what's important for the organization, right? So that's why I said in your pre-survey communication, how much is the CEO and the business leadership team involved makes a big difference to the response to the engagement survey.
Very true. And especially, so how do we get that business buy-in is what you said during the presentation about, actionable insights and kind of showing that once we measure this particular parameter, that we are going to get some sort of a result that is going to help us revamp our organizational structure or the way we engage employees. So very true. It all kind of, talks about the whole journey, if you will. I'm going to jump right to Pankaj's question. He's asking, did we create a group level engagement index? And also the engagement model, was the engagement model proven for business linkages and respective, the benchmarks? So I think he has multiple questions here. And he's also asking about how the need for continuous listening and online action planning and tracking can be managed. So if you could, maybe focus on the last
You could
part.
pick one question so that I could answer any one or two of them, because there are, I think, 4 questions there. So
Yeah, so if you could just focus on maybe the last part of that question, how does the need of continuous listening and online action planning can be managed? How do you track that and make employee engagement surveys not an annual thing, but a continuous initiative?
Yeah, so it depends on what you want to listen to continuously, right? So let me go back to the medical example I took in the beginning. Would you want to do a master health check every day? Check your blood every day? No, right? So you want to track a few vital things on a continuous basis, maybe something that you're doing that is having an impact and so on. If you track everything every day, all the time, then there is obviously an issue, or that we're not sure what we want to do with what. It could be a focus. There is one thing. So continuous listening is okay for things about which you're clear you want continuous listening. Asking questions every day will give you a lot of data, will keep you entertained. Something will go up, something will go down. But if you don't know what to do with it, it's going to be, it's going to be fatigue on the employee. And then after some time, it will only generate cynicism and skepticism. So I would suggest asking questions or taking dipsticks at a frequency at which you are in a position to do something about it, and not as let's just collect the information and keep it simple.
Thank you so much for that answer. One last question. This one is about the focus group discussions that you mentioned towards the end. So how do you prioritize which action plan should be taken up first? And, especially kind of collating all that information from focus group discussions. How would you suggest HR professionals?
So you correct. So first you pick up where you want to do the focus group discussions, because you want to do them in places where you don't understand why those results have come, right? The whys of the results are not clear. So the focus group discussion will then give you in-depth understanding of what exactly is the problem. So typically where you're surprised, or typically where the scores are so off the mark that you have no clue kind of thing, right? So that will give you what the focus group discussions will give you is an ability to focus on the right things that the employees are really bothered about today, right? Then on a set of, you will have a menu of things. Let's do this, let's do that. We will increase this. We will take them out on a picnic. We will increase communication. So rather than that, there may be just one thing that people are looking for. Yeah. So maybe I know we're running out of time, but I'll add my favorite example, my all-time favorite example. Right. So we had a factory where we did this among the workmen. Right, and they had a very low score on certain things. So when we did the focus group interview, the people said, the earlier plant manager used to, at Diwali time, he would come to each one of our workstations, wish us, and give us a box of sweets. Now he's retired and we have a new guy in, and he left the box of sweets at the gate and said, as you go, just collect it. We are all insulted by this, right? Now, if you don't do this focus group, you're not going to find this particular little thing that you can do to increase engagement dramatically, right? You will be trying all sorts of things. We'll put posters. We will do many things that are standard in our armory of engagement things, and not find that this is such a small thing that people have felt personally about. So what you do with the focus group interview depends on what you want to understand, how deeply you want to go into the whys of employees' responses, and from there give you one or two big things that you can do to make a change.
Thank you so much for sharing that example. I mean, it's so interesting how a little bit of personal interaction can have such a big impact on not just your engagement with the organization, but also your productivity, and kind of has a positive impact on the work that you do as well. I think that is a great way to close out our Q&A session, Shyam. And I would actually like to invite Vidya to share her thoughts. Vidya from Adrenaline, please, join us for, sharing your insights about the session, and also kind of close out the wonderful webcast that we had today. Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you so much, Mr. Shyam. That was such an insight, and I think you beautifully split it into 3 segments in terms of pre-post and survey administration as well. In fact, just to quickly touch upon Shailaja's question on how, on the number of questions specifically to IT sector. Here are my 2 cents. So what happens is, in fact, Shyam also spoke about it. So it's really to think about what's in it for me as an employee. So once that is done, I think the employee should be able to answer any number of questions. And it also depends on the frequency, right? So post the survey that Mr. Shyam spoke about, if they are able to see that quick wins post the survey, and going forward, when you release your next survey, the number of questions really will not be as what I think. So first time maybe you might want to reduce the number of questions to see the pulse of the employee. But once you start concentrating on the quick wins, the employee get to see those results visibly, then the number of questions can be increased in the due course. So that's my thought. So thank you so much once again. So we are thank you, Valerie, for doing this for us. And we at Adrenaline are very passionate about HR, and we build HCM solutions for organizations of all sizes. So this webcast is our way to bring together HR fraternity, collaborate with each other to share industry best practices in HR functions. So thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vidya. I really appreciate it. It has been wonderful to host both you, Vidya, and Sham today. And thank you to the audience for sharing your questions with us. I think the way the presentation was structured, pre, during, and post survey, as you said, Vidya, that actually helped everyone kind of walk that journey with us. So thank you so much, and I really want to urge the audience members to share their feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section, because everybody's input really matters to us. And also, I would like to thank our partners for today, Adrenaline, and thank you to Sham and Vidya for being here. And thanks a lot for the invaluable information that has been shared over here today. Stay tuned for many more exciting such webcasts. That includes today's session. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Vidya.
Thank you.
Thank you.